Good afternoon, everyone. If you wouldn't mind taking a seat, we're going to start our program today. Great to see you all after the not snowpocalypse, the not-pocalypse. We were really frightened on Friday, but all is good. My name is Stephanie Parrish. I am the Associate Director of Programs here at the museum, and it's been a real pleasure to be part of the exhibition and program planning for The Map is Not the Territory. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the ancestral lands of the indigenous peoples on which the Portland Art Museum now stands. We are meeting today on the lands of the Multnomah and the Chinook people. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, so please take a moment to consider the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, settlement, and resilience that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. I want to thank our colleagues at the Native Arts and Culture Foundation, who are based over in Vancouver, Washington, who helped us and offered their advice in developing our land acknowledgement protocol. And please consider learning more about them and the amazing work that they do funding contemporary Native artists. So as I walked through the show on Friday, it was a real pleasure to see so much individual work come together that I had heard Grace talking about and that I had seen in little digital files as we were preparing for this exhibition. And what really struck me was the collective voice that came through when you see it all together. Grace has talked about this project as a generative conversation, and that really didn't resonate with me personally until I did actually walk through the physical space and then had a chance to meet the artists. Walking through it, I think, feels like sitting at a dinner table and being part of a lively conversation between artists and ideas and themes. So today, you are all part of a little experiment that we're doing. As we were developing programs, and this opening event in particular, Grace said, I don't want this to be business as usual. I want to do something different. And we talked about ideas and very quickly said, what if we try a PechaKucha format for today? We'd never done this before. And I'm curious, how many of you have participated in a PechaKucha or gone to a PechaKucha? So I'd say that's maybe half the room. Okay. So PechaKuchas are a way for a lot of people to participate at one time without it being a boring panel discussion and without it taking 3 hours. PechaKucha is a format that started in about 2003 in Tokyo when a bunch of artists and designers thought, what if we gave everybody 20 slides and 20 seconds? And that means you have about 6 minutes to go through your slides. And you have to be concise and fast, and it just has to move. You can't sort of linger along. So we presented this idea to all of the artists, and they said, yeah, sure, let's try it out. So that's what we're doing today. Welcome to the museum's first PechaKucha. Be kind to us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grace Kook-Anderson, our fabulous curator of Northwest Art, the Arlene and Harold Schnitzer curator of Northwest Art, who is going to set us off on our course today and get us going. Grace.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you all here today. Thank you. I'll be giving sort of my own PechaKucha introduction, but before we get started, I wanted to pose the question, that the topic, which is the guiding question for all of us has been, what does the map is not the territory mean to you? And how does your work in the exhibition reflect that? So each artist has spent a lot of time thinking around these ideas as they were preparing for the exhibition as well. And you will hear a chime. So where when there's a minute left, you'll hear a chime, a sort of a gentle nudge for all of us as we're going along. Oh, thank you. How lovely. And then it chimes again when we need to wrap up. And then as a gentle hook to pull you away. And I hope if we have a little bit of time, perhaps we can do a Q&A. But more importantly, I hope that you'll all walk over with us to see the exhibition and have a chance to talk to the artists one-on-one. We'll be here until 4 to hang out in the space and to have the opportunity to talk on a more personal level. So I'd like to call up all the artists here. Annette, Bellamy, Henry Tsang, Ryan Pierce, Jenny Irene Miller. Yes, if you can all come up here. Fernanda, D'Agostino, Charlene, Vickers. And then Marianne Peters is based in Seattle, and she's heading home early because of the impending snowstorm that's due to happen, and also she's about to become a grandmother, so a lot of things are happening. So I am her understudy, so I will be your Marianne when the time comes up. Okay. So just to make it fun, and because it's not nerve-wracking enough, I thought it would be great if we pull out our numbers from the hat, and so the orders are being determined as we speak. Oh no!
Mine just says go home.
Okay, so Marianne Peters, number 6. All right. So thank you all so much. And so Annette, you're going to be the first one, and then Jenny, Irene, you're 2. Okay, great. All right. So shall we get started? Am I on? Okay, thank you. Oh, no, I'm on. Okay. All right. So, hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out, especially when we had such uncertain weather, and it's turned out to be this gorgeous day. So in preparation for today's program, I'd like to give a huge thanks to Amy Gray and Stephanie Parrish from our Department of Learning and Community Partnerships, and to Kathy Denning, who swept in as my amazing volunteer for special exhibitions in preparation for this exhibition, and who's also put together all of our music selections. And for my part of the PechaKucha, I wanted to share with you a bit of my process and behind the scenes of putting together this exhibition. It's a bit of a departure from what the artists will be diving into, but I just wanted to give you a bit of the context, and let's go. Sorry, back here. So since the start of my position at the museum about 2 years ago, and right up until just this past summer, I spent a lot of time on studio visits, thinking about the Northwest region, thinking about this place, what does it mean, and connecting conversations with artists as I was visiting. And with such a vast region, I decided for this iteration, I would focus on the Cascadia Range, so Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, and Alaska. And thinking about what are some of our shared characteristics, being on the eastern edge of the Pacific Rim. What are our local concerns? What are our shared economies? How are we looking at greater issues? What is our global outlook? What keeps us keeping? And on these fabulous trips and visits, I got to sometimes bring my son along with me. So here's Dennis with Annette. We're on her town skiff heading over from Homer to Halibut Cove, where her home and studio is. And ultimately, I narrowed it down to 8 artists who held these conversations with me throughout the entire time. while displaying very diverse approaches and ways of working. So I'll run through each artist. Fernanda D'Agostino creates for us an environment to be a part of, to see the climate changing, to feel the effects on our bodies, to draw connections to the refugee crisis, the desperation of border crossings that go hand in hand with the effects of climate change. Ryan Pierce asks us to really see a near future, to see our errors, and to see that in spite of us, a resilience persists in the world around us. Charlene Vickers offers reflective moments and spaces for healing and to continue remembering. Henry Tsang revisits the 1851 Tansy Point Treaty, signed in good faith yet never ratified by the federal government, where to this day the Chinook Nation continues to strive for official recognition. Marianne Peters, focusing on moments related to the Syrian refugee crisis, Marianne Peters creates impossible monuments to offer reverence for those instances that will likely get lost or overlooked in history. Rhee questions the borders between the vessel that holds and the object it contains. How do we distinguish the two? And how does one form affect the other within? Annette Bellamy draws the world around us very closely. As a longtime commercial fisherwoman and one who works with clay, Annette asks us to see these relationships between land and sea and invites us to feel time. Jenny Irene Miller, through a serial portrait project with Continuous, Jenny Irene asks, how do we as Indigenous people decolonize our sexualities, genders, and the way we treat individuals who identify outside the standard binary, male or female? I hope you will see these beautiful faces and learn their stories in this work. And we have amazing programming. So this is just an example of what took place this November. We had K through 12 PPS art teachers for a full-day workshop in preparation for building their own curriculum for an art exhibit here in the Miller Gallery in April. It's called The Heart of Portland, and they've been working through being inspired by the artists and being inspired by the themes. Things you don't see in the exhibition, we had, I'm just going to give you a sampling because there's so many hands involved in making an exhibition work. We had Matthew Juniper, our chief preparator, and his team. They worked ever so closely with the artists in this very installation-heavy and media-sophisticated exhibition. We had Samantha Springer, our conservator, get on board in tandem with a couple of artists to test out shaving cream, what works in the space, and glycerin. We want it to melt, we want it to sweat, but how much does it sweat in the space? And I'm so thankful for our relatively new exhibitions registrar, Julia Guerrilla, who jumped right in. This was her first exhibition project, and she whipped my checklist into shape. And then here we have John Richardson, our video editor. He's here with Marianne Peters, but he created stunning videos for each and every artist, and I hope you will sit down and watch them, because it's just mesmerizing. So with this, I repeat myself, just as the other night. This exhibition is not so much a statement as it is an invitation. It's an invitation to see deeply, and I hope that we can do that together. I thank you all so much for being here and for being a part of this. Thank you. Okay, there you go, Annette.
Okay, go. This is a pot that I made, and it was wood-fired in Peter Olson's kiln in Index, Washington. And it looks like an empty bowl, but it's actually not an empty bowl. It's filled, Can I run back? This is my pot. Wood-fired in Peter Olson's kiln in Index, Washington. And it looks like an empty bowl, but it's not an empty bowl. It contains a story of connection between peoples that crosses borders and time. And pots they're a strong place in my heart. We live in Halibut Cove by a tide book in our pocket at all times. This is high tide at our house dock. This is the lowering tide in front of our house. And when you live by the tides, you live with a natural rhythm of nature. This is Village. It's about interdependency and community, life on an island. And in nature, it's about architecture without architects. This is Breakup, and it's the shadows of porcelain that are echoing the patterns of pan ice on the ocean. And this was done some years ago, but now when I see this piece, I'm thinking about the Arctic ice melting faster than ever, opening up new trails. This piece is my first piece that I ever did in fish skin, and it documents 6 months of our meals of fish. And they're in 11 columns, 6 to 8 feet tall. We live on fish. And after it was done, it was mounted on the wall. It had the movement of the ocean. And the title of this piece is Home Economics. Slow Food is about the Alaskan food culture. It's about the drama of the wild salmon runs. And the salmon runs are being affected by climate change. And I don't know what we'd do without our salmon. Green Beans is a celebration of the patterns of harvest, the lush patterns of the abundancy in the summers. Everybody has a garden and it's full of daylight and things grow like a jungle. This is the brightest piece that I've ever done with color. It's a close-up of an installation of my refrigerator. And in season, my refrigerator is really abundant. It has fresh fish, it has smoked salmon, it has salmon caviar, vegetables from the garden, and berries, and on and on. They kind of spill out of I have 2 refrigerators. This is one of the few photographs that I have of fishing. It's Marvin's hauling longline gear, and I'm standing on deck next to him. It's a yellow eye rockfish that's a bycatch. It's 100% mortality because when it comes up, the swim bladder fills with air. So we bring all of the yellow eyes in. And it gives you a feel, I hope, that you can't actually feel the cold and wet, but you might from the photograph. And maybe some of the fish smell and just the feel of what it's like to harvest fish, be out at sea. Long Lines tells the story through the shadow of the hooks. It's like the handwriting of the story of how we still continue to fish with a hook and line, thousands of years. This is our boat going home from up the Chillicothe Straits after a halibut trip. And it's a little boat in a big ocean. But as big as the ocean is very, very fragile. An overview of an installation that's 14 feet long, titled Floating, hung on very fine lines so that the air movement in the gallery causes them to have like the ocean's breath and have a movement. And this is a detail of those boats. It's the ocean's always moving. When you're on a boat, you get used to that. And I've always loved going home to eat at a table that doesn't move. And this was a companion installation to Floating. This is called Sinkers. It's a 12-foot outline of a boat. And it's about the things that anchor us and the things that weigh us. And it's hung by heavier lines, so when it moves from the air movement in the gallery, it has more of a heaving movement with the weight on it. dip net, using an old piece of a dip net from our warehouse, and coral's ore, rowing through phosphorescence. Out of Water that's in this exhibition has layers and layers of stories, but it's an homage to the fish that have sustained us, and it's also in reference to one of the first art forms for women, the quilt. And Moving Mountains is in this exhibit. And I just want people to look at mountains differently, maybe almost look into the mountain, down into the earth. Fish fingers, 45 three-dimensional fish fingers, and each finger represents a year that I have fished, and it's also pay attention, sustainability, and it's also underlying story of when you go into a grocery store in the frozen food department, your TV dinners, the industrial food, fish sticks, etc. And I'm trying to make a statement about the sustainability for the fisheries and continuing support of small boat fisheries. And this is my last image, and it's my hands that try to repair things, and I hope everybody does what they can.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jenny Irene Miller. My Inupiaq name is Wigamu. I'm a photographer. I also identify as Inupiaq, white, gay, and queer. My identities play a big role in my work. That's me in the Hulk t-shirt. Inupiaq and Inuit people span across the circumpolar north in places we now call Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Russia. I'm from Nome, and come from the Inupiaq people of the Bering Strait region of Northwest Alaska. This map illustrates the many villages once inhabited in the same area I just showed you prior to colonization and force efforts to set up permanent towns and hubs. This region was and still is home to many unique Alaska Native people. So I'll just go back real quick so you can see. My maternal family roots originate from the native village of Kinnigan, also known as Wales, Alaska. Historically, Kinnigan had approximately 600 inhabitants and included 3 village sites. The population was decimated by the flu epidemic of 1918, killing over half of the community, including my great-grandparents' family members. Today, the population is approximately 160 people. In Alaska and elsewhere, Euro-colonial government policies force various acts of removal, assimilation, and erasure upon indigenous peoples. Genocidal systems and policies remain, fighting against indigenous communities. This includes policy that declares who is and who is not indigenous, according to Blood Quantum, reducing the rights and general population of indigenous people through unsettling measures not designed by our people. Through my own healing process, I have learned that colonial systems continue to gnaw at us, and some of us have internalized them deeply and reflect them in our relationships with others. One way we do this is by rejecting LGBTQ+ and Two-Spirit peoples from our own communities. Communities are support systems and can be integral to one's survival. When Indigenous communities reject our queer peers, we are fragmenting ourselves, stalling our healing, and furthering the process of removal. It was during my healing process, which is an ongoing process, that my portrait series, Continuous, was conceptualized. Continuous stems from a personal desire to inspire dialogue and to use art as a way to connect Indigenous, LGBTQ, and Two-Spirit people beyond borders and maps. I believe that prior to colonization, my ancestors did not just discriminate against those who were gender variant or non-heterosexual. I believe that the value of an individual was measured by their contribution to their community, leaving queer individuals free from judgment and harm. By acknowledging, respecting, and uplifting our LGBTQ+ and Two-Spirit community members, we can continue to strengthen our communities. And I believe it's impossible to have healthy communities without the inclusion of all of us. This is a step towards decolonization. Continuous asks, how do we as Indigenous people decolonize our sexualities and genders and the way we treat those who identify outside of the binary male or female? This work is personal and communal. It is the product of the many years it took me to overcome the internalized hatred and fear of my own identity and sexuality. So what is decolonization to me in my work? Indigenous activists describe decolonization as an active process. Its ultimate purpose is to overturn the colonial structure and realize Indigenous liberation. Decolonization first starts within. One must question the systems put into place by others that have informed the way we think and value each other. Examining myself through art has allowed me to find ways to undo colonial systems designed to erase parts of my identity, whether it be my Inupiaq or my queer identities. The colonial perspectives shared through Christianity that I previously normalized were designed to allow me as a queer were not designed to allow me as a queer Inupiaq person to flourish. They were designed to weaken and to destroy me. So the individuals featured in Continuous are a small sampling of the Indigenous LGBTQ and Two-Spirit community. So what is Two-Spirit? Indigenous activists in 1990 defined the term Two-Spirit as the presence of both a feminine and a masculine spirit in one person. It determines the qualities that define a person's social role and spiritual gifts and evokes pre-colonial values. An elder from my region shared with me that a Inupiaq word bearing similar qualities to the term Two-Spirit was once used. That word hasn't been used in the more recent history. I believe it is essential to have conversations about LGBTQ realities within all Indigenous communities, and to learn and reclaim words for what we now call LGBTQ+ peoples in our languages, if such words exist. It will connect us to our ancestors within this time of healing. I also understand that cultures are not static, and we can create new terms within our Indigenous languages for LGBTQ+ and Two-Spirit peoples, which will empower us. Continuous aims to transform negative attitudes towards Indigenous LGBTQ+ and Two-Spirit peoples, breaking down stereotypes and showing that we as Indigenous people are diverse in the way we look, act, feel, and see the world. Continuous was conceived to help us better understand the impact colonialism has had on Indigenous peoples and how many of us have internalized homophobia and transphobia, and how we can actively decolonize. Continuous inspires dialogue and brings a face to the urgency of recognizing Indigenous LGBTQ+ and Two-Spirit peoples. Thank you. One note, I forgot to start changing the slides. I got caught up in my words. So thanks, that was my first ever PechaKucha.
So I'm going to show some images today. They're not images of my work, but images that I've been thinking about while making work for this exhibition. They're images of viviparous fruits. Some of you may have seen something like this in your own home or kitchen. So what happens with viviparous fruits is the seed germinates inside the host fruit. Usually germination happens outside of the fruit in the soil. So what you see when you're looking at a viviparous fruit is something that's out of sequence, in which the normal chain of events is kind of rewritten in a new and perhaps revelatory way. I like viviparous fruits. Vivipary is a phenomenon in plants. It's called viviparity in mammals and animals. But what I was interested with vivipary is here's a situation in which the seed, which is normally a vessel for the plant to propagate itself through the fruit, here the seed takes on a life of its own. And so I was really interested in what does that look like for us when we see the normal chain of events or we see the normal hierarchies upended, rewritten? What does that mean about how daily life is perhaps a rewriting of the same theme over and over again? I think it's kind of like a chicken and egg conundrum, where we have a relationship that we try to talk about in terms of actors. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? But in reality, what we have is something that's nested, where both things are nested inside of each other. Of course, it's a difficult thing to answer. It's a paradox because every chicken contains, oh, should I say that? The chicken contains the egg and the egg contains the chicken in an equal and sort of indelible measure. So perhaps the paradox comes not from the reality, but from the question we try to ask of the reality. When we try to say, like, to this continuous and ever-changing reality to fit into discontinuous or perhaps digitized segments. So I guess have been collecting these images as a way of kind of fortifying my own knowledge of possibility of the world. Perhaps looking at these things and continuing to look at these things as a way of envisioning perhaps a different future, but also envisioning my own present in a way that I hadn't conceived of possibly before. I saw there was this quote that I'm assuming Grace wrote, but it was in the wall text. It says, through the field of general semantics, Korzybski's intent, he was the person who coined the term, the map is not the territory. Korzybski's intent was to improve the way people interact with one another and the environment, particularly through critical use of words and other symbols in connection to our living experiences. So I think of this as perhaps this and my own work as in relationship to that intent, where I guess I find myself looking around the world for images that, for me, improve my relationship to the world and to others, perhaps by allowing me to focus on the relationship and the way that relationships can be rewritten. So, I mean, I guess I was thinking about the term transference in psychoanalysis, where you take a relationship that is perhaps traumatic, toxic, unhealthy, and then that relationships get transferred by us over and over. When we have an image of a way of doing it differently, of breaking that cycle, perhaps that gives us the faith or the hope to kind of have a hiatus in the rewriting. I don't think it rewrites the past, but it allows a moment in the present to kind of stop and consider whether or not a different pattern is possible. I also find these things to be just fascinating to look at. I think I find that there's a real interesting relationship between kind of fruits and bodies. And I actually have a friend who won't eat fruit because it looks too much like bodies to him, but that's a whole different story. But vivipary is interesting too because viviparity, which is the kind of like typical. Typical is the wrong word. Vivipary occurs in mammals in kind of birth in the uterus, and I think part of what's difficult for us to look at in this is looking at the kind of personhood or subjecthood of a vegetable or plant, that when they look like people, perhaps we have to recognize or respect them as kinds of people. So, I got two more. The next one is an apple. It won't look like an apple. And the last one is a mango. And finally, the last slide are source material for all these images. None of them are mine, and I don't want to claim any credit for the very interesting images you have just seen. Thank you.
So Grace asked us to respond to the question, what does the map is not the territory mean to you? And I think in Borderline, I was really trying to look at how these arbitrary categories that we make about contemporary life are really just that. With the map, there's sort of a logic that's imposed on nature that might not really apply. It's a simulacrum of what's real. And in Borderline, I was interested in the intersection of climate crisis, mass migration, and the surveillance culture. I conceived of it as being a series of installations that would not only interrogate these arbitrary categories, but would also use space not only in an architectural way within galleries, but in a geographic way, in that it would inhabit these different places. This is the very first iteration of Borderline, and it was a projection mapping on the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. This was done in conjunction with Collective Action Studio. Through the whole project, another borderline that's been sort of exploded for me is the idea of the individual artist as this sort of heroic individual genius, because every part of my project has involved collaboration. And in this case, in collaborating with Collective Actions Studio, I was introduced to the technology that really would enable the entire rest of the project to take place. And this is also the biggest scale that the piece inhabited. It was also a place where anybody could see the work. There was no entry fee. There were, just passersby in cars would pull over to take a look. So I really liked the democratic nature of that public space. The next iteration of Borderline, this was in September of 2018, and I had been doing a residency at Open Signal PDX, which, if you don't know it, is a community media center here in Portland that is in the historically Black community, and it's also probably one of the most diverse art spaces in the entire city, and I was really, really privileged to be part of a study group there. I formed a collaboration with two young women who are performance artists, and also with a whole crew of people who helped me to realize this work. In this iteration, this was called mapping, I sort of broke down the different components of the project so that they were each clearly visible but in proximity to each other. The next iteration, also at Open Signal, was called Embody, and this another version of this will appear here on March 15th. And this is when the space of the installation is activated by my collaborators, Jaleesa Johnston and Sophia Wright, MA. The idea with Borderline is to break down and dissolve those differences, those sort of categories. So through creative coding, I've been able to merge images of forest fires, extreme weather, border crossings, with images of people enacting their historic trauma, and also with images of the audience. That if you've seen the exhibition, you probably have seen yourselves being inserted into government surveillance footage of migrants crossing the border. This is Jaleesa Johnston, and she works with historic trauma of the Black community. This was the next iteration. This was called Borderline Decameron, and this is looking back at another inflection point in history, which was the time of the Black Plague. And also during the Black Plague, there was the same sort of divisiveness as there is now. In response to this crisis, one group of people really doubled down on their dogma, and they were burning books, burning paintings, and burning people who challenged the established dogma. And then another group of people said, we've been lied to. What is the truth? We don't know what the truth is anymore. We have to investigate more. We have to find other ways of knowing. And that was the beginning of science. So images from Decameron. Another part of Decameron was a way of breaking down borderlines between different communities. So there was a dinner in which people were invited to share stories. And finally, this is a sort of preview of the performance that will occur here on March 15th. And I hope you'll all come, because it's pretty amazing to see Jaleesa and Sophia interacting in the flesh, in body, with their projected images.
Hello. My name's Charlene Vickers. I'm located in Vancouver, BC, but originally I'm from Ontario. I was born in Kenora, Ontario, and grew up in Toronto. I'm Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Kwe. So I guess I just want to explain a little bit about who I am and what my practice entails. In the show, it's mostly sculpture, but I also do performance, video, and painting. So when I think about the idea of the map is not the territory, I think about my own experience and where I'm situated in Vancouver, and thinking about my experience as a Ojibwe in West Coast territory, and how it's played a large part in sort of like bringing together who I am as an adult and as an artist. So, okay. So when I'm working, I sort of begin with a feeling or a memory, and trying to find an understanding of where I am and how to be motivated and reach for unknown things. There's a sense of energy and excitement that spurs me on. I take inspiration from other artists and teachers, and I try to stay in school for as long as possible. So I'm looking for concepts. I'm sort of influenced through my heritage. I'm influenced by minimalism, I'm influenced by performativity and performance art. So thoughts and actions that capture energy and index, process, and my presence. The underlying themes and narratives are essential and expressed through materials and form. Materials of every day, such as denim, acrylic and wool blankets, cotton fabric strips, my own hair, twine, glass beads. They all signal lived experience, reflecting the world around me. My Nishikwe eyes and heart are picking up the info. As I walk through the city, hear news on CBC radio, view stories of the world, an eco shutdown on Facebook, or I see a Native woman's face as missing on a poster, the feelings are taken in to be acted upon, expressed, enfolded, stitched, carved, painted, and beaded out in sadness and anger, and ultimately as protection. So there is a lot of, what I do is I use my body as a sign of presence. And I do a lot of collaboration with performance. And this is me and my friend Maria Hutfield performing at the Seattle Art Fair. For me, I was raised outside of my community. I was adopted into a non-Native family. I didn't know any cultural teachings or even any other Native people growing up. So a large part of what I do is making my presence present in the world. So the sleepwalking and moccasin work that I have in the show is really a reclamation of my identity as Anishinaabe Kwe, Ojibwe woman, Native chick. And this performance here that I'm involved in is sort of this remembrance of a moment in history from my community where there was a organized sort of occupation of a park just outside of Kenora. So what I did was make this big sign, and I sort of took it around and performed the sign. And so like people they'd either have like the choice of ignoring me, or they could like ask me, oh, like, where is this place? What are you talking about? And so then I could like tell the history. I could like embody the history and embody my place, embody like who I was. And so it really is more of a sort of opening the conversation. So this is me in the Nuit Blanche in Saskatoon in Canada. And this picture here is, this is me sort of like intruding on somebody else's performed situation where he would like tape people up to like exercise equipment. And so like I was like, well, nobody's really paying attention to me over here by the bush. And he's got this whole area all lit up with like cameras and stuff. So I'm like going, okay, I'm gonna get in there too. So I had this sort of like this tape, this pink tape, and I would go in with my sign and talk to the people who were like taped to this exercise equipment. And then people would be like going, oh, what's that woman doing? She's got a sign, and she's like part of this man's performance. And I'm like going, no, I'm just like, I just got to get in there and get some attention.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marianne Peters. Marianne was very prepared, so the notes are in her voice, so I'll be reading just as she has written it. Oops. Let's see. Okay. Oh, let's see. So the notes are appearing. Oh, okay, never mind. I got it. It's all good. I don't recall exactly my introduction to the work of Alfred Korzybski, but while researching how the footprint of migration informs the memory of migration, I stumbled onto mind mapping and the essay of The Map is Not the Territory. I stumbled onto the possibility that in Arabic, the word for desert and the one for labyrinth shared the same syntax. Both are readable. One is intentionally convoluted and the other naturally so. Defining space is interchangeable with believing that you understand the parameters of place. Included in this musing was the possibility of genetic memory. This was an intuited drawing whose layout I discovered after the fact was almost identical to the photo of Mount Lebanon, the region my family originally came from. When my father died, we found a letter from his father written while he was away at college. The guts of the letter reminisces about the beauty of the region and ends with, "I know it's really difficult, but please find the Syrian boys. This is the mothership for my work." As an homage to my father, I made an installation called Find the Syrian Boys. A honeycomb aluminum table lined with family photos rested on an uprooted tree surrounded by walls that wept at intervals. My father's name was Shafi, but everyone called him Pete. The color is in the color of the dirt of the Bekaa Valley and in Paris, Texas, where my father's family lived when he received the letter. A 5-kilometer no man's land separates the Lebanese and Syrian borders. While passing through the stretch of land, it made me think about imposed and suspended conflicts and their arbitrariness in defining territory. People define territory by their actions. Territory and the possessive tenets that define it depend upon which side of the line you stand on, what filters you use, what you choose as your allegiance to place. It's simultaneously fact and fiction. I made a 12-foot-long drawing called Map to an Impossible Monument, the precursor to my installation series before I even knew I wanted to make them. I was trying to draw the concept of looking for something I only understood through nostalgia and family lore. In this one, in my conversation with Marianne, she talks about this painting as not having a beginning or an end, this kind of rumination in the painting. Research feeds my work, as does the unexpected tendril narratives that pop up, like learning that the French interred thousands of Spanish refugees fleeing Franco. These political cartoons were part of an exhibition about the Spanish in Mexico who were given refuge, one of many hidden incidents. Buried histories accompany all official records of migration, experiences, and particularly in conflict zones. But inevitably, they resurface in displacement narratives. How communities link nostalgia, faith, and cultural focus is one way the map is not the territory. This drawing mapped the imperfections on a plastered board to create the image. Each mark fed a new one until this landscape emerged. I was unwittingly becoming a landscape painter of unverifiable but believable sites, the kindred to how memory informs or distorts truth. In 1982, the father of the current Syrian president bombed the city of Hama to squelch an uprising. Up to 20,000 people died, but no one knew because he shut down the airwaves and closed the borders. Every year, there is a ritual cleansing and remembrance of the river that cuts through Hama. It has a vast irrigation system fed by water wheels, and red paint is poured into the water as these sites commemorate the loss. I made painting the river red in response. Reading all this tormented Middle Eastern history informed my mainly religious conflict, and seeing the parallels around the globe, I concluded any notion of nirvana is going to be pretty compromised. This piece is called Messy Heaven. But people are resilient and find their connections despite the splintered experiences. This is a ledger in Amshit, my grandmother's village, documenting her family tree and marriage to my grandfather in Louisiana. In contemporary migrations, the phone is the ledger and the most prized item they carry for contact, navigation, and visions of home. These migrants are searching for a signal. Homogenizing cultures makes a false notion of territory and cultural affinities and ignores that language translates place. In this map of the Arab world, close to 30 languages are spoken. Impossible monument, telltale. Telltales are navigational and wind-determinant ribbons on a sail, but the word telltale in other iterations refers to something that is suspect or untrustworthy. When someone sets sail, it's implied that they are set free, but also tethered to the place they are leaving. These decorative patterns, drawn from memory, anchor Middle Eastern architecture to destroyed structures. No matter the circumstances, communities in a state of flux invent a semblance of normalcy. What stays the same is never so, is a piece I made using a print of, is a piece I made using a print of a cobweb on my front porch and redrawing it 8 times. It illustrates that just when we think we know the territory morphs. Thank you. Here's 2. Sorry.
Hey, thanks for being here. I'm Ryan. I wanted to thank Grace and the museum staff. They've been really generous and accommodating, and especially Susan, who I sent like 40 emails asking for comp tickets for friends. And I wanted to thank these other artists. It's just really a deep honor to get to exhibit with all of you. And then I need to provide a disclaimer. I mean, I kind of do anytime I open my mouth, but especially now. I was thinking I could just condense my typical artist talk into 6 minutes, and then I went to run through it shortly before presenting and realized that that was a train wreck. And so I scrapped it all and picked new slides, and I just kind of made a list. And the theme of the map is not the territory. You know, to me, I infer that like the depiction is not the same as the thing it depicts. And for a figurative painter, that is such a neat fit. And it feels like the themes in this show fit my work really well. And that maybe by elaborating about that, I would just deaden that connection. And so instead, I'm going to attempt to evoke a little more than explain. And so I'm just going to cycle through some paintings from the last like 8 or 10 years or so and read you a list called Partial List of Things to Learn Before the Future Arrives. All the ways to make medicine from plants. What animals are always talking about to us and to each other. Picking locks, repairing windows, mending sailcloth, navigating by the stars. Techniques for hibernation. What to do instead of calling the cops. How to make a good rope from fibers or discarded lingerie. How to make money into compost. Wound care, euthanasia, using leeches for health or recreation. Clock repair. No, maybe not clock repair. Marking paths with colored rags. The many uses of venom. Anticipating volcanoes and harnessing their heat for bathwater. How to make a boat from anything. Traps and snares and homemade fireworks. How to revive lost languages to see what we've missed. Restorative treachery. Harvesting salt after jazzercise. We still get to have jazzercise. The insights and applications of lunacy. Dentistry from reclaimed sharpened garden tools. Ancestor worship. Hide glue, skin books, making ink out of our enemies. What the hell to do with all these broken cars? How to fix the old stories so our children do it better. Carbon sequestration through tantric breathing. Analog video conferencing and chat room rituals. Which larvae pair with which wines? Secret signals, secret names. How to waterproof a thing or just get over it. How to meet at a predetermined place and time without a phone. Repairing and regrading the surfaces of roads. The appearance of certain birds, what that might say about your future love and wealth and weather. Getting used to everything smelling like smoke. Tying knots, untying them, darning and mending. Cloud seeding and interpretation. Scarification as map or warning. Companion planting and soil restoration. How to stop caring about progress, or at least pretending that it's linear. How to repurpose the insurance industry. Long-distance storytelling using shadow puppets. What to do with all the bombs. Radical, fearless empathy and all associated embarrassment. And most of all, how to lean into the weather.
Yeah, that's me. Hi, my name is Henry Jung, and for those of you who are not keeping count, I'm last. I'd like to also offer my thanks and gratitude to the Portland Art Museum and especially to Grace and Matthew and John and the amazing staff and everybody here, all the supporters. It's been a really terrific opportunity and a real privilege to create a new work for this exhibition, and the experience of the research and then getting to actually make the work. It's been quite the journey, and I hope to share a little bit with you right away. And I also want to say how much I appreciate the territorial acknowledgments that the Portland Art Museum has been embracing to pay respect for and to confirm once again our place and relationship to the people who've been here before and are still around us. And as somebody who wasn't born in North America but came here on a jet plane at the age of 3 3/4, when you're 3 3/4, it's a lot older than 3 1/2. That shift, I remember it very clearly, that shift in consciousness and relationship with who you thought was people and how you are considered as people. That shift was really profound and at times terrifying and at times violent, but it's good to understand and remember. So I will start talking about a trade language that if we gathered here 170 years ago, high likelihood I'd be speaking to you in Chinook jargon. Chances are excellent that that would be the way we'd be communicating between people who have different languages as their base. Chinook jargon was used up and down the coast of the Pacific, from southern Alaska all the way to northern California, inland all the way to the Rockies, for, well, about a century and a half on a regular basis. And before that, there were trade languages as well, because there were over 120 languages along the coast. It's an awful lot. When the first fort was set up by the John Jacob Astor Company, Fort Astoria, which is at the mouth of the Columbia River, well, you had English come in, and you had French from the Hudson Bay Company and Northwest Company. So the Chinook people, their language forms the majority of the lexicon. New Chalneth from Vancouver Island is also in there because they had the fast boats to bring the products up and down and inland. And of course, these folks who came from back east and up north, they brought other goods to trade, and those are the 4 main languages in Chinook jargon, which is a trade language, a pidgin, etc. I made a piece in Vancouver, a public art project that is not up right now because it's been down for 3 years, undergoing maintenance. It's 350 feet long along the seawall handrail, downtown Vancouver, False Creek. If you know Vancouver at all, there is Chinook jargon and also literally translated English underneath, and below that, a fiber optic lighting cable that changes color every few seconds. And this language refers to different communities coming together to live and to find new ways to build a new home together. It also refers to the fiber optic technology that was being installed underground in the former Expo 86 site and promoted as Canada's first fiber optic community, where you can turn on your gas fireplace from work or check out your surveillance cameras on, well, eventually what would be a smartphone. Here's an image at night. Well, 3 minutes already. So anyways, I'm going to accelerate. This is a drawing from 1813 of Fort Astoria. 1813 had just turned, I think it was actually Fort George by then, because the Hudson Bay Company took it over, and then they moved their base up to Fort Vancouver. And here's one of the 8 treaties that were signed in 1851 at Tansey Point between Anson Dart, who was the superintendent of what was his title? Anyways, he was the person who represented Washington and signed 8 agreements with the Chinook and 3 others of the non-Chinook from further up river, and they had a deal. But unfortunately, it was never ratified, and thereby this deal, this agreement that would have been made after negotiations, was never honored. So the research that I did took me to Tansy Point. Here's my beautiful handwriting of Tansy Point where it is nowadays on that map. Oh, and this is the splash page of the Chinook Nation. They've been fighting for recognition since 1851. I reached out to the chair of the Chinook Nation, Tony Johnson, who is a Chinook jargon specialist and helped set up the Lane Community College Chinook Jargon Program. You can get a diploma there if you're interested in learning the language in Eugene, Oregon. And he graciously, enthusiastically participated in the project. I gave him a passage from a James Swan book that was published just a few years after the treaty was signed. James Swan traveled around the Pacific Northwest, attended some attempts at treaty making. In this book, he criticizes the way treaty making was happening and was very, very unhappy with the way that the government and the white people, were making these agreements without honoring them. So that was a really tough period for a lot of folks who waited for the provisions to come, never came, had their land taken away from them, and got nothing in return. This is a picture of me with the rotating rig. Oh, no, that's not it. I'm looking at the wrong pictures. Wow. Okay, so there's a picture of Tony and Mary. We were doing an audio recording in the hallway of Evergreen College because that was quiet. And this is my partner, Emmy. She did all the sound work. This is me taking testing out the camera. It's on a rotating rig with electric motor. It spins around actually on a pottery wheel. And here's a still from the video, and there's text running across as the camera is rotating slowly around the area, and there's actually text there too, but when you step in front of the floor projector, there's two projectors, your body casts a shadow, that shadow reveals the text in the landscape. And there are two texts, one I talked about, the James Swan, and the other one is Tony Johnson's response to the James Swan text. And they've both been translated into Chinook jargon. And what you'll hear in the gallery is Tony's voice speaking Chinook jargon, which would have been the language that negotiations were used to create the treaties. And so before I finish, I hope I'll get a chance to talk about how language is a tool to represent reality, but and also our speculative worlds. We create symbols and signs to form these words and syntax. It's also language is also a reflection of the limits of what we know and of our values and thereby of power relations. It can reflect respect and it can reflect disrespect. The use of language or the use of choosing not to respond is also very powerful. So this map is not the territory. In so many ways, I see it as the map is the desire for territory. Because why would you create a map unless you want to control that land in some way? Thank you.
So we have, first, artists. Thank you. Can we give them another round? We have a few minutes if there are any questions that anyone in the audience wants to ask of any of the artists, or for Grace.
I guess I was just wondering about some of the coloring on the Art of Water from Annette Bellamy.
From Annette, yeah. I'm wondering, should we have you guys all come up just in case so you can answer along the way? Oh, great. There's a roaming mic too. Oh, whichever you prefer.
I'm up here now.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
What is your question?
I guess just some of the different colors. There's kind of like the bluish and the kind of tan and almost like a zebra print. Are those natural, or did you kind of color influence on the Art of Water? No, the Art of Water, the fish leather.
Oh, Out of Water. That's all natural colors. And after you've sewn it and dried it, it's more muted, but there's a brilliance when it's wet. It's kind of like the life of it. These are the ghosts of the fish that were. And somebody asked me yesterday when I was in the gallery why they're all cut apart. But a fish was round. It held the fish meat. And if I tried to just butterfly fillet it, skin it, and have the full skin, it would have ripples when it dried. So I cut it and make it so it can lie flat. So it has a memory and a history, just like a lot of things do in the natural world.
I guess what were the fish, the kind of bluish and the zebra-like patterning?
Well, there were there's all the species that we have caught through longlining and with seines and gillnets, mainly. So the longline is halibut. That's the target species that we're fishing for. Then we have the yellow eye rockfish that was the white, delicate, large scales. Then we had lingcod that's thick leather. Then we had sablefish that is very thin. The butter of the sea, it's 18% oil content. And when I scraped it, and I sewed it and patted it between claws, it would still, to this day, have some oil content in that skin. And it's like nylon, stretchy. 5 species of salmon. The Chinook were the 2 large on the lower side. Butterflied chum up above because I butterflied those for canning. So I wanted people to know I can those. And there's smokefish. The amber is smoked salmon. And there's that was chum salmon that I canned. There's coho salmon and sockeye salmon is what we target. And there's Pacific gray cod and, I think I've covered everything, but a lot of fish.
It's a really simple question, also for Annette. Is frozen sea ice salty?
Frozen sea ice. Yep, the ocean is salty.
But when
Yeah.
is there, when the ice freezes, does the salt stay in it?
Yeah, it takes a lot colder temperature to freeze the salt water. And we get the harbor in Homer packed with ice. It's frozen ice from the river systems up at the head of the bay, and the big tides pick it up, and predominant northeast winds push it up against the Homer Spit in the harbor. That's what we're coastal and south central Alaska, so it's different ice than the Arctic ice. There's all kinds of ice. That's a good question, actually. Yep.
I have a question about vivipary. Vivipary. Now,
You've seen what I know about it.
what is the relationship then between your examples of vivipary and your own work?
Maybe I'll tell you mine and you tell me yours first.
About what?
See, I clearly I presented it as a proposition, so I kind of, maybe to use Annette's language, I put a line out. So I'm curious what you might see, and then I'll tell you what I might see. Because
I'm not a fisherman.
Well, I guess I don't.
Or maybe I am a fisherman.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fishing for what?
I don't see a single. I don't see a single Catholic connection. I wanted them to invoke a sense of possibility in the everyday. I wanted them to, along those lines, to show us something that we do not think about or recognize as being full of life, or full of life that we can't control, as being just that. I can't forget them, and I think that relates to how art matters, how art survives. There was this really interesting reading I read where it talked about human beings as the best storage media of information ever created. So the ways that we affect each other is also a way that information travels into the future. But these are speculations, and I think I work via speculation. So,
whose work was it that you were referencing?
There's a lot of different people. Most of those images, I mean, you could, if you want to see more of that stuff, you just go to Instagram, there's like a vivipary hashtag. But a lot of those, interestingly, were gardening blogs. A lot of people sending emails into gardening blogs saying like, what is going on here? Should I be alarmed, or can I find out more information about this? And some of them are people just taking photos. Some of them are researchers trying to see why this happens, how it happens. That's the vast majority of where those images came from.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in absentia of you. Let's say 7. Listening to each of you, in one regard, you're each presenting a problem, an actually really complex set of problems, but one is different from the next. And so I, as a citizen, not as an artist, but as a citizen in a way, want to ask any of you, what would you wish for us and for the crowds that will hopefully see the show? Because I, as an individual, and none of us as an individual, can probably do the work to address each of these 7 problems. So what do you wish for us through your work and through your investigation?
I think that it's really easy to be overwhelmed in the times we're living right now. And I think that if we try to make a little bit of difference, it'll all add up. And that's what I hope for. I think it's, I'm an optimist, but all the steps that we can take in small ways add up. And some people can't take some steps, but they could take some kind of measure to address an issue that's been presented here tonight, which is across the board, or maybe one that wasn't even spoken about tonight.
I would say, please remember it.
I would ask that you question yourself as well and see how you fit into certain movements, and also recognize your own privilege and what you can do to help everyone else live a better life as well. Because even myself, I have a lot of privileges, and I recognize those, and I use my privilege to advocate for others and work together, because we're all in this world together.
I hope that you'll be moved to take action in your individual lives, and all of us have different actions that we're capable of. And I think at this point in time, we really need to ask ourselves how much we can possibly do, and that'll be different for everybody. But the really important thing is for us to collectively try to move ourselves into a more kind and sustainable future.
I think what I would like people to take away from looking at all of our work is just to find some sort of ground or centering within yourself in terms of feeling and understanding, and knowing how we all fit together, and that we have to like really start to open our eyes and figure out like what sort of journey or footprint we're going to put on the earth. So we've got to take care of Mother Earth.
I would ask that you stockpile pharmaceuticals, because they will be difficult to manufacture. Additionally, I think that, like for me as an art viewer, an artist has a chance to reframe a set of problems through a new lens, and so that's my hope, that people will glean from all of our work.
I hope there's something along the way in the way one moves through one's life where you are surprised by something that will intrigue you and plant some seed from within. What was that word, Rob? Yeah. And some of those seeds will grow and some won't, but they'll still be in you, and it'll change you from within. Hopefully for the better, hopefully not for the worse, But, you know, if you have, like I think many of us have been saying, if you have the privilege, if you have the luxury, if you have the power to make things a little bit better, yeah, that's the question, really.
Henry, I just thought of something. What about the Chinook Foundation and fundraising?
Oh yeah, I ran out of time. So the Chinook Nation are currently fundraising to buy that piece of property, Tansy Point, which before the treaty was signed there, it still is a very special place. It has been a special place for an awful long time, not just because it's one of the few safe places to land at the mouth of the Columbia River, because anybody who's been out there knows just how incredibly treacherous it is, especially when the weather is, as they say in Chinook, snotty. So, and there's a lot of shipwrecks out there, right? So there's a GoFundMe campaign, it's online, they're trying to reach a certain amount. The owner wants to sell it to them at a discounted price, but even so, it's still a lot more than they have. They don't have a lot of resources, and actually the number that's on the GoFundMe campaign is considerably less than what they have, because someone came forward with $50,000. That's not in that campaign. Yeah, so consider that if you're interested to contribute to a bit of our collective history.